everybody. I hope the mic's working, right?
No.
No? Oh, now it is. How is everybody doing? Great? Good lunch? Feeling sleepy? Okay, we'll wake you up. We have some very prominent, talented guests here that are going to entertain you. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm Sameer. I look after the Z's operations in North America, now also South America, since we've launched a Bollywood channel in Spanish. Not sure if I'm going to get a chance to watch it, but the Latinos are loving it. They love the color, the story, the music, and soon will be very successful here in US as well. It is a sheer privilege to be really amongst you all dignitaries and intelligent people. I will really not want to pretend I know a lot about literature. It's been a long time I have read anything. When they said I have to do this small talk and open this session, and I was like, oh my God, what do I speak? I've not read anything, I don't know what it means. Then I took some time to reflect on my past, and I thought, okay, I'm not that bad. I've done some reading in life. I thought those were textbooks growing up, not really anything heavy. I've been with Z for 15 years, 12 years of that in North America. Seen the operations of Z here grow from a small-time one channel that catered to the only Asian Indians that live here as the diaspora immigrant community, to what we are now, United States' largest multicultural broadcaster. We distribute close to 40 networks, 40 channels here in US in 15 different languages. And the reason I'm giving you guys this precursor is because you've seen Z support this amazing festival and the efforts and the movement it has created amongst literates and what it aims to do. But it also ties into our philosophy, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is the world is one family. We as an organization believe deeply into this thought that promotes us to support causes like this. My colleague here, Sunil, who's been the brainchild behind this initiative and supporting what Teamworks does. And it is now my job to make sure here in US this effort is grows by leaps and bounds, and there's more support that Z Jaipur Literature Festival in United States has. Coming back to the session that we have, the culture of reading. As I said, growing up in India as a kid, you always get whipped because your parents want to study and read. That age you don't realize what it means. Later on you realize it shapes you as a person. It creates the character for you. You know, from being a small town boy in India to be in United States, to be amongst you great people, dignitaries, influencers for the society. I think reading was something that really changed this course, gave a shape to this. And as Z as a brand, Z is committed to causes like this that makes world a better place. Without much time, I would like to pass on the mic to our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you. And I also thank Z Multimedia and of course Teamwork Arts for bringing us all together and putting this wonderful festival together. I'm Philip Lutgendorf. I'm a cultural historian of North India basically, and I write about the culture there. I'll say a little bit about my own work in a bit, but let me begin by introducing our distinguished author panelists. To my right, Amy Stolz is author of the novel The Ninth Wife, published in 2011, and a young adult novel called Palms to the Ground, winner of a Parents' Choice Gold Award. She spent years as a journalist covering the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska before receiving an MFA in creative writing from American University. Currently, she's the director of literature at the National Endowment for the Arts, where she has worked since 1998. I hope you will continue to work for a long time to come. collaborating with writers, translators, including the translator, the first American translator of one of Alberto's novels, editors, booksellers, publishers, in order to keep contemporary literature a vital part of American society. Alberto Luis Sanchez is a Mexican writer and editor of more than 29 books, many of them award-winning, and that have been translated into 20 languages, but only 3 of his books translated so far into English. His works include Poetics of Wonder, The Secret Gardens of Mogador, that was the one that, that you were involved in giving a grant to the translator of, and Mogador, The Names of the Air. Since 1988, he, along with his wife, Margarita de Orellana, have been running the leading arts magazine and publishing house, Artes de Mexico. Namita Gokhale, as I think probably known to everyone here, is writer, publisher, and festival director. She herself is the author of 16 books, including many works of fiction and reinterpretation of Indian mythology. Her debut novel, Paro, Dreams of Passion, published in 1984, and the recent Things to Leave Behind has been described as her most ambitious novel yet. She is, of course, founder and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival and also of Mountain Echoes, the Bhutan Literature Festival. And she directs a publishing company called Yatra Books, a publishing house in India specializing in translations across Indian languages, which is very important. I have a visual that I wanted to start with. As a cultural historian of North India, I thought I would think for a little bit, in thinking about the title of this panel, I wanted to rename it with the culture in the plural. I wanted to talk about cultures of reading, because of course there isn't just one. And I wanted to think a little bit about oral tradition and cultures of reading that exist even among people who are quote-unquote illiterate. And so the image on the left there is a portrait of the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great, in the second half of the 16th century, when he ruled much of the subcontinent. A Muslim, he ruled over a vast empire in which the majority of his subjects were Hindu. Illiterate, he loved books and reading and storytelling so much that he commissioned some of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts ever created, including Persian translations of the great Sanskrit epics Ramayana and Mahabharata. And these were read out to him at bedtime, both for his own entertainment and so that he could be more familiar with the culture of his subjects and of his important Hindu allies among the Rajput kings. And thinking about Akbar makes me reflect on several things: the importance of books, but also the importance of reading aloud, recitation, performance, especially of poetry, and also of the technology of books and reading, whether it's for a Mughal emperor in a mixed literate-illiterate society, or in an audiobook today being enjoyed by someone on a portable media player while driving a car or walking to work. It also makes me reflect on the importance of translation, both between languages and between different cultures and worldviews, as vital to human understanding and to peace. Akbar, of course, is famous for promoting a policy known in Persian as Sul-i-Kul, peace with all, which was intended to promote harmony among the various states and religious communities of the subcontinent. When I started my field work in North India on the performance traditions of the Hindi Ramayana text of Tulsidas, which I'm now engaged in translating, I met many people who knew the entire epic by heart. This is almost 13,000 line epic, about 600 pages. And I met many people who knew it by heart. Some of these people were illiterate. One of them was a man who had been blind from birth and had committed this entire epic poem to memory, as well as many other works, by the way. That wasn't the only thing he had memorized. This marvelous kind of mixture of printed text, a famous cultural epic, and a culture of mixed literate and non-literate inspired my work and my first book, which is called The Life of a Text. Looking at how books function, one kind of culture of reading. As a university professor, and here I'm going to sound a little bit like a dinosaur, for the last 32 years I teach at the University of Iowa. I have seen a shortening of attention spans. I have seen students who more and more don't want to read anything longer than a couple of pages, anything longer than what they might find on a website. And what they read, they want to reduce to what my students increasingly call takeaways, which are usually a series of kind of bullet points, reduced to a couple of sentences, such as one might tweet. And this does concern me, this does alarm me. It is a different kind of culture of reading. It's still a culture of reading, but of a different sort. So with that introduction, I want to invite my distinguished panelists to each reflect from their own perspective. And I thought maybe each of you could take about 10 minutes, and then that should leave time for Q&A, which some of the sessions haven't had, and I know people want here, because interaction is very important at the JLF. And again, to remind you, the stated theme is how the arts create a culture of empathy and cooperation. And we're looking at the ways that they create connectivities between languages, and how can we keep humanities relevant and support the infrastructure of cultural communication. So shall we go in seated order? Start with Namita, do you want to?
I don't mind, but I have to tell you, I'm one of those attention span people. I think I'll keep mine a little shorter. I'm trying to say it as soon as I can. Well, welcome all of you, and everybody in the audience is very clearly part of the culture of reading. At least I hope so. And the ways people read have changed, as Philip said. I also think that there's a new language coming our way, which is somewhere between emojis and emotions. And I wrote a novel about I wrote a novel which was published in 2011, and my very distinguished editor in Penguin in India threw a fit because I had used emojis in the novel. And he said, no, but I think now actually a novel can be, a short novel, a very short novel can be written in a series of emojis. The language, is such a strange construct. It requires so much interaction on both parts and has such an ambiguous back end of what something may mean to one person and to another. There are so many languages in the world. I'm very proud to belong to India, which has 24 national languages, including English, which cross borders with other. So we have Bengali, which is spoken as much, and if not more than French, and has more of a corpus of literature in it. There's Urdu, which crosses over with Pakistan. There's more Nepali speakers in India than there are in Nepal. And Malayalam, Tamil is the oldest language in India, 2,000 years old, a classical language. So we have this generations of literature. And one of the reasons behind the founding of the Jaipur Literature Festival for me was to create a forum for all these languages, because they were getting extinguished not by English. English is now adapted to India and become very much an Indian language, and we have our own Hinglish, which is a Hindi English, which we write differently. We've taken ownership of English there. But I've always felt that the enemy of all the languages in India is a strange new language, and of reading, therefore, is a strange new language which has come up around the world, which is called globish. And globish is spoken everywhere with, it's a proper, what do you say, academic term, which includes a vocabulary of about 1,500 words. And so in India, there's a whole aspirational pull of people wanting to read and write in English. And they are leaving these traditions of languages which are so old and so established, with 17 words for clouds and 24 words for a particular type of tree. They are leaving these literatures and this legacy of their own past and migrating to globish with its very banal, its very convenient vocabulary and what it can convey. And I think this is reductionist in a really horrible way. A lot of new books in India are being written in globish by people who don't have, there's a beauty in simplicity which I appreciate. So I'm very happy in a way that these narratives are being told in the simplest possible way. So I have no problem with that. But I say that we stand at a moment in our reading culture where we are really poised between a past which had more time. Tolstoy had the long winters in Russia to slave away at his book and have his wife rewrite it in longhand for him. We just read very quickly, and as Philip said, there's then a takeaway. And that takeaway is again, it's a denial of the whole process of doubt and affirmation, which is a good book. So that's about where I'm coming from in Indian languages, and how we are trying to seek the process of translation to translate not only into the world languages, but also into the other Indian languages. But the thought that when we came up with the subject of today's conversation, what gave me the greatest moment of panic, as it does once in a while, is that we have this huge corpus of oral literature in India, which, as he said, there's the Mahabharata. There are, in modern times, many young people have been told to forget the value of memory. We grew up in a rote culture in India. I was never very good at it, but people knew their tables, their multiplication tables, they knew their grammar by heart, they knew enormous amounts of poetry. But now you can't remember the phone number of your neighbor unless you look it up on your phone, you know. So Google and these kind of memory aids are actually destroying the process of memory. On the other hand, you have many languages which are the legacy of people who are not literate, who are not able to read and write, but they are certainly not illiterate. And they have carried sometimes 20 days of recitation in their heads. And this generation of people who did this are now disappearing. Their sons are becoming software engineers, or they're becoming whatever it is, a lot of hairdressers. People are becoming different things. And that's good, I mean, but the fact is that this generation that carried, that was the memory bank of almost, well, in India everything is 2,000 years or 5,000 years, so you can take your choice, 2,000 or 5,000, but thousands of years in a planet long ago, there was this oral literature. And if we lose it, we lose so much. So this is my greatest concern in the culture of reading, that the orality of our literatures, which in a way literature festivals bring back, because we are not saying, all of us, that communicate with us only through print. Because that dissociation happened with Gutenberg and the printing press, and it went on. And right now, technology has given us both the trap of this brevity, and it's also given us the gift of returning the voice and the word and everything back. Song, rhyme, poetry, it's back in one forum. But people have to have the joy and the capacity to bring all these disciplines back in, and to rediscover the culture of reading through music, through images, through whatever. So on that note, I mean, I've given you the basics, and maybe on the questions we can come back.
Well, I'll take from your idea about oral cultures, because the last time I was in Jaipur Festival, one of the sessions that I enjoyed most, and all of them are interesting because they are weird, That means that an original writer has to be a little weird. And many of them are not in the commercial trend of literature. And between the people that I met, and that was really shocking in the pleasant way of shocking, was a couple of storytellers from a little town in Rajasthan that came with a wood box. And this wood box had little doors that open and slices of wood that you moved. And everything was painted, it was like illustrated, there was characters and everything. And the nice thing about this box is that you can open it in more than 100 ways. And the people who tells these stories is a young man and an old man. And he's the father-in-law of the young man. And so there's like a dynamics already of a common problems family in a town. They go from town to town, and they get, before making their show, they get informed about the little gossips of what is happening in town. So they are telling what they know, but it's not only what they bring, it's also what they take from there. And they tell stories, and that was really wonderful. It's something that I couldn't find. Well, there's many ways of doing that, but I couldn't find it but there. So it's one of the things that I thank the Jaipur Festival so much. And of course, I come from a country where there is many ways of reading. There is many languages, and I thank the plural you added to the culture of reading, cultures of reading. And there is not only the diversity of languages, but a diversity of cultures means something else. Means, for example, that a little wood painting that is woven tells a story, and it was made in the Huichol Indians. It tells a story, but this little piece I had was made by a shaman, which changes everything, because that man has a function in the community. Is at the same time a healer, but he's also like a psychoanalyst. You know, one of the highest sicknesses that you have in popular culture societies in Mexico is a sickness called noise. So they read all these paintings to go to achieve silence, the inner silence, but also the silence surrounding you, because thanks to the media, thanks to our fears, thanks to our ambitions, we are full of noise. And one of the lessons that we need to know is how to read everyday life in a way that we find a path through all the noises towards silence, towards a better way of being. The nice thing about these paintings, later I tried to contact the shaman, and I bought more paintings from him. Unfortunately, it was in his last year of life, but I got together with some people and we decided to buy him all he could produce in a year, asking him to tell the cosmology of the Huichol Indians, tell his myths, so do something that we can show, organize a show and show it to everyone, make people study it and everything. And one of the amazing things is that when the figures are coded. So there is a man who has the head of a deer, there is circles, there is 4 different colors. The nice thing about his reading of his work is that each time that I asked him to read this painting, he did it in a different way. From our modern point of view, you will say he's cheating, he's selling me garbage or something. So in a moment that I found that he was sincere, without making him feel that I was questioning his reading, I told him, why you tell me a different story every time that I ask you to read it? And he said, because it tells a myth, and that myth is alive. If I tell it in the same way, it dies. And I found it a metaphor of what happens with reading. We read books in our own way. There is one entrance to that garden of what we find in a book. And another nice thing about these paintings is that they are not telling a story of the myth. They are not just reproducing the myth. They are enacting it. I mean, you go to a Catholic church, 19th century, and you see a scene of the Bible, and it's quite boring and quite ugly art. Because they, before Baroque and in Baroque, the painting was the enacting, was almost the apparition of the gods. You needed not to illustrate and have a knowledge about the myth, but to experience the myth. So these paintings is something that you have to experience. That means that this invocation of gods, and they don't only have one god, they have many gods. This invocation of gods exists only, and the gods appears only if there is a painting. The painting is the space where the gods appear. And the reading of it is the act on which they appear. You don't have that if you only have them illustrating the story, they doesn't appear. That is very similar to what happens with contemporary art. You see a Rothko, you can see, I don't know, in the collections there is the chapel in Houston, but there is also in Washington this wonderful room where you have 4 paintings of Rothko, abstract art, 2 colors, and you go there and you have an experience. And I think that literature, and one of our tasks as writers, is to think of what we do in that way. We are performing something so that the people at the other side, the people seeing it, performs the reading of it, the experience of reading it, not only the illustration of the contents. And so we have a very poor dimension of reading if we only pay attention to the contents. And that's one of the things that happens to internet. For me, it's not only the shortening of the attention, it's also the nature of reading. I publish a magazine that is an arts magazine, and when people see the electronic version, they say it's like going to an exhibition on a virtual visit. That's the difference. So books offers you many dimensions, and reading offers you many dimensions. So that is very important. And I think that illiteracy is not only bad between people who doesn't read. There is the functional reading, also the people who has powers and doesn't get access to read. And because, you know, reading is not an ability you acquire. Reading is something that appeals to a human dimension. If we only care about feeding ourselves, we are degrading our human dimension. To read, to find the books that change your life, to find the books that make sense to your life, is exercising one of the dimensions we have as humans. If you don't read, you are like not using one of your arms because you found the machine more comfortable to use just one of them. To read is not like living in the sea and learning to swim or learning how to use a bicycle. To read is like exploring the dimension of falling in love. A person who doesn't read is someone who never fell in love and doesn't know what it is about. I stop there.
Alberto, you helped me quiet my noise. I have a lot of noise. I'm from Washington, D.C. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure, and thank you all for coming today. And there's so much to respond to, but I will, can you hear me? So I will offer up some thoughts from my perspective. I direct the literature program at the National Endowment for the Arts, which many of you know is the U.S. federal agency that supports the arts. And so I often see things, and I should say that a lot of my focus is not just on, you mentioned illiteracy, but alliteracy. There are folks who they can read but are choosing not to. That is a big part of my focus. So I see it very often from a bird's eye point of view. And I love the stories. I have many stories, but in terms of trying to encourage a reading culture, and words like infrastructure and connectivity and all of this is right up my alley and what I try and do. I often see it, and I said this to Philip and the others, that I see this problem in terms of, as a problem because I have to. I follow trends, and I want to make sure that we continue to have a reading culture, that it's very deep. And I see it almost in three parts. One is who is writing the stuff that we are reading, and we need to make sure that it's not just that there's a diversity of voices, and how are these voices getting out there, and are we teaching well and encouraging these a multiplicity of voices? So who's doing the writing that the culture is reading? And then I want to make sure that it's not just who's writing, but how is it getting out there? How is this material being distributed? How is it? Are people reading print? Are they reading online? Are they encountering it through visuals or other ways? Is the diversity of writing that we're trying to encourage getting out there, or are we just hearing the mass marketed? Are we hearing from other cultures? Are they being translated well? So it's not just about who's writing, it's about who's distributing and how that writing, why and how that writing is being the bridge between the writer and the reader. And then the last part I think about is who's reading, and what are they reading, and why are they reading? And so they talked about the attention span. So that's interesting because obviously we still have the novels out there and long reading. So how is it that in something like the NEA could help? And we do it by various ways. We give out individual fellowships to poets and prose writers and translators. And I will say that we also give grants to organizations like literary festivals and publishers and literary centers and things like that. So we have the NEA, for example, did fund Rhonda Buchanan, the translator. We gave her a $12,000 grant to translate through a competitive process to translate Alberto's book. Then we gave a grant to the publisher to publish it. And I would say that Alberto, for example, came to the National Book Festival a year to 2 years, last year. We fund the National Book Festival. So we really do capture it in all sorts of ways. Through our individual fellowships and translation, we have funded translations of books from more than 80 countries in the last 30 years in more than 60 languages, and including, as I was saying before, in Bengali, Urdu, Tamil, Bengali, and I think there might be one more from India. But so we do help in many ways. We also have larger initiatives that include, one is Poetry Out Loud, which you may have heard of. It's a poetry recitation contest. It reaches millions of kids around the country, where kids and high school students compete. They learn poems and they compete to recite them, and then they win at the school level, then the winner from the school goes to the state level, and then the state winners compete in DC for money and whatnot. But it's completely diverse, and you have kids from every state. It's really powerful because you have one student from every state on stage at the same time from all states across America, and they're there for the love of poetry. So it's really, really exciting. Another program we do is called the NEA Big Read, which we have, it's like a one book, one community program. We reach 75 communities around the country every year, where the community gets the mayor's office and community partners. And again, we've reached millions of people in like Claudia Rankine Citizen is on our list. So there are 12 communities that are programming Citizen around the country. They will get everybody involved and start talking. So I will just throw a couple of things out there, that thoughts when I think about the reading culture and things that we can do that encourage a reading culture. One of the things is certainly to encourage the young to write. If you become a soccer fan, often because you've played soccer as a kid, the more you know about soccer, the more you're going to appreciate watching soccer. So if we can get kids and adults at all ages into writing workshops and understanding about the writing, they will be better readers and be more involved in reading culture. We like to remove the barriers. So that means translation. So let's make sure that the books that are out there, out there around the world, can be translated into English, but not translated into English, like they get the copyright and all that, but not just translated into English, translated well. Because it doesn't do with the books in their original languages any good if they're translated poorly. So we want to make sure that they're translated well and we can get those books out there. So we want to break down those barriers. And we also want to put authors in front of audiences. If you heard Alberto this morning, you would run out and read his book. If you didn't know his work, you would run out and read his book, because it's another way of introducing this beyond the page, that these authors are human, and you put them in front of audiences, they very often turn to the books and become readers in that way. I like to enhance the literary experience, and so we were talking about visuals, music, film, any way that we can pair words with other art forms that bring people to writing is always a good idea. Competition can work. Doesn't always work, but our Poetry Out Loud program is, the kids get into reciting poetry because they might win something. That's okay, they'll eventually come to poetry, but they come to it through competition. You see this through libraries, through summer reading. You want kids to continue reading through the summer, that they have little incentives. But finally, the last thing is to encourage dialogue. That's the best way that we have found to encourage a reading culture, is that you authors write books, and you have the books out there, but if you can bring people of different perspectives and different viewpoints and all that to come together, not just, you're going to get a lot more effective and building empathy if you can bring people. If you bring people together just to talk about an issue, it could be you might not hear each other as well as if you bring people of different viewpoints together to talk about a piece of art, to talk about a book of poetry or a novel. And if you can come together as humans and talk about a book, then the dialogue starts happening. As dialogue starts happening, then you understand how reading builds empathy. And that's sort of how I'm.
We have 10 minutes plus Q&A?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we do have a little teeny bit more time. May I use my powers as moderator to say something in response to this? These have been wonderful, impassioned arguments for cultures of reading from different perspectives. I want to respond to something Namita said about globish, and coming back to India and coming back to Hindi, which is the language that I am most involved in. And Hindi cinema, which I actually write about a lot. So I'm not against movies or anything. I mean, it's an important part of culture, and in fact, it's an important part of keeping Hindi and Urdu alive in popular culture in India today. But this impoverishment of language that's coming about through a certain kind of English, certainly not through English, because Indians are doing some of the best writing in English there is, but a certain kind of English that has become a kind of norm, which is what you're calling globish, I think. So the poet that I translate, Tulsidas, he uses, for example, 29 different words for lotus. Okay, I always point this out. So a couple of years ago, there was a film that came out. Some of you might have seen it. It's called Delhi Belly. It's a clever film. It's a kind of gross-out comedy. And it was made in English originally. And then, because you can only go so far with English in India, it was dubbed in Hindi. Now, if you compare the two versions, it's very interesting because it's about these 4 young guys in Delhi, and they use very, very foul language all the time. But in the English version, which is actually what the actors are actually saying, the most common word in the film starts with an F and ends with a K. And it occurs, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I mean, it's basically much of what everybody says. In the Hindi version, Hindi has all these marvelous, what we call galiyan, you know, these nasty things that you can say, and it's ever so much richer in the dubbed Hindi version. So that's just about globish.
Could I respond to that? You know, there is a tradition in Rajasthan, where the Jaipur festival is held, of meethi gali. And meethi gali is a way of giving sweet abuses. And on certain days, on certain festivals like Holi, you actually use this way to vent yourself and your creativity by giving the sweetest, but actually the ugliest abuses. That means very clever ones. And the second thing I wanted to say was that I personally feel that Hindi cinema, I won't call it Bollywood, but Hindi cinema, Indian cinema.
I don't normally
Yes.
call it Bollywood.
I feel this has been a great gift to the Indian languages because at least 4 or 5 of our very greatest poets, including people like Gulzar or Javed, who are poets of the highest quality, they write poetry which is served as lyrics and sung. So the music and the poetry and the lyrical tradition in India are at one with the mass media. So the public never leaves the poetry because they have poetry in their veins because of the Indian cinema. So I'm really grateful to the cinema for that.
Anything more?
About abuses.
And then we'll
Well, just a little compliment about the people who doesn't read. It's not only, sometimes it's not that they chose not to read, but they have a high level job and they are incapable of reading. We had a president like that. So the actual one chose not to read.
We're talking about Mexico.
Mexico, yes. It's the other side of the wall of hell. and the actual president doesn't know how to read, but he can do it, but he chose not to do it. He bought someone to write his thesis, and so it's quite corrupt as everyday life. And the problem is that if they don't know how to read, they cannot read reality. So when his government began, even Time had a cover saying the savior of Mexico. And of course, there was the first crisis that was some cartel killing 43 students in the south of Mexico, but it was a governor of the other party. So they decided to wash their hands, believing that the crisis will not touch he and his party and his group. He didn't read the gravity of reality. So I think, and when he was in a book fair, somebody asked him 3 books he likes, and he was incapable. After a quarter, he said, a Bible. He said, but I'm just beginning. So he's really a mess. But before that one, there was a president who was unable to read the little cards they gave him to read. And it was terrible. And I loved very much, because the same happened in Canada. And do you know this author, Jean Martel, the author of the story of Pi? When his prime minister said that he didn't know how to read, he decided to read a book for the president, for the prime minister, every week. So he read a book and said, the title of his column was "The Book I Read for the President." So he read a book and he told the president how they voted. But to finish, A friend of mine, a Japanese friend, told me that when she was a child, they learned how to write haikus. Haiku is a very coded form, 17 syllables. It's linked to nature, so to the seasons, but it's also linked to spirituality. So in 17 syllables, you have to tell a lot about you, about what is happening behind and outside, and also about the sense of life. So I made a proposition that politicians and sponsors and power people who doesn't read and give speeches in the Congress even would be forgiven of giving speeches. They should make a haiku. Anything that they cannot tell in 7 syllables should be avoided. They didn't pay attention to me yet.
I was just going to add that I think we need to define, in terms of reading, what we mean, because this is something I face all the time. When I say illiterate, and when I think about folks who are not reading but can, I am really talking about the books, right? Whether they dig into books and whether they have the attention span for books. But I also like to make the argument, people said that they don't read. I say, yeah, I think you do. I mean, you know, when we asked questions through the census questions, there was a question and to collect data, we asked the general public, have you read one book of poetry in the last year? And we get information back. Well, the poetry world came back to us and said, that's not fair to ask us if you're also asking in the dance, if you've danced at a wedding. You know, it's not fair to ask if you read a book, because sometimes through poetry you encounter a poem online, or a poem at a wedding, or through music. I mean, I fielded a lot of questions on when Dylan won the Nobel, and what is literature, and what is, you know, our encounter with literature. Does it have to be through reading? Does it have to be this? These are fantastic conversations to be having, and it's good we're having them.
Let's take questions from. So over there, can somebody pass a microphone? Do you do that in here?
We don't have any. Sorry.
Okay. Well then.
Maybe I can speak louder.
Yeah, I think
Everybody can hear me. I would like to sing the praise of the memory aids and the short form. I used to be an avid, almost ravenous reader. Now I'm almost 75, and I can't follow complicated storylines, multiple characters, multiple times, plots like that afford attention span, or attention over time. So I'm reduced to short form, to memory aids, to films, TV, talks. All of them also need attention. So I wanted to remind you that there is something like the post reader, and to add this person to the diversity discussion. That's my.
I think in another generation, the post generation in India used to be the grandmothers, who then told the stories which were the accumulated wisdom of their lives. But they told them in very simple terms because they were telling them to children.
Yeah,
and that
I want
is
to
the...
get stories told, not only repeating my own stories.
But, okay, very well.
All right, well, thank you all for such a stimulating panel. Philip asked us to begin the panel by thinking about cultures of reading. That got me thinking about subcultures of reading. One subculture of readers are writers. So I wonder if you have thoughts on what distinguishes readers who are writers. What does the process of writing, how does that affect you as a reader?
But I talk too much. Well, I can tell you an experience that I decided to write something about the experience of waking up with the person you love. And I'm living with the same woman from so many years, 40. So I think that that's not normal. That's a pathology. And there is pathologies in life that help you to live and to be happy. So I decided to learn how come that happens. So I try to pay attention to what happens every day we wake up. So I took note every day for 3 years that and writing a kind of a text, it could be, say, a poem every week, and making a video with that text and putting it online so I can have people telling me, I live that, no, that's not true, yes, I love. So that's like accelerating the experience, proposing my experience to have more experiences. And I learn a lot about my own relationship. I discovered, for example, that well, you know, there is a lot of eroticism, but it's not only eroticism, everybody knows it. So sometimes, you know, you discover that the people you are waking up is snoring, for example. So I didn't know what did I do, because that doesn't bother me at all. And it's not tolerance. I'm not a tolerant people. It's something else in this pathology. So I discovered writing it, just writing it, I discovered it. Observation was not enough. When that happened, I imagined immediately what was happening in her dream. And I immediately had the mechanism of getting into her dreams. That was erotic for me. It was like, almost like getting into her body. I was getting into her dreams. And that's something I learned from writing. And it was a way of reading not only her body, but the whole situation, and reading our pathology.
He may have become the dream date.
Okay, I just wanted to... Yeah. Philip, this question's for you. I discovered you and your work from your cinema blog. Why have you stopped doing that? Because I want to move beyond and learn more about your work. Please bring that back.
Where is the time? I'm translating a 7-volume epic from 16th century Hindi, and you know, I just, yeah.
And that's the blog you should
and
have.
Hindi films take a lot of time.
No, not Hindi. It's the blog of new work that you're doing. Maybe that's where you can start.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate the plug. Yeah.
And you can find still the last. What's the name of the blog?
It's Phillips Films. Phillips Films. Films is spelled F-I-L-U-M-S, which is the Hindi pronunciation of the English word.
Very new,
Phillips Films. Yeah. This gentleman here.
Yeah, this question was mainly for Amy Stoll, because you said you work with the NEA, so of course you're conscious of how funding's being cut, and how this generally the culture of American culture tends to oppose STEM education, the literary education, and disparage the latter for the sake of the former. So I was wondering how, in the context of all of this, you are seeking to prevent the things that you do and the things that you organize and the education that you're attempting to give students from simply becoming like a small, like irrelevant voice for the students you're trying to reach. Since having suffered through the academic system, I know that a lot of people are so busy. They're like, what? I don't need books. I just need to do well on my SATs.
Can you repeat the question?
It's about how the current politics that disparages the arts and humanities, which he gave good examples of from his own experience, could be.
How do we carry on?
How do you stay relevant?
How do we stay relevant?
Yeah.
And by we, do you mean the NEA, or do you mean
or just more broadly, I guess.
Right. We carry on. It's a good question. I'm also very aware that this is being taped. So I will say that we are likely going to be funded through December, and many of us are very committed to the arts. The staff at the literature staff is very committed. I've been at the endowment for almost 20 years, so I kind of know how things work. I'm also aware that the NEA is the biggest game in town when it comes to literature. There were other big funders, they have sort of dried up. And so if the NEA goes away, it would be devastating to the literary field in America. So that drives us too, right? We have a lot of support, a lot of organizations around the country that are working on behalf of literature. There's something called Lipnet. You can get, if you want to support literature, go check out Lipnet. It's an organization of 60 literary organizations that are sort of working on behalf of the field and making sure that literature and arts education and all of that is relevant. But it's a matter of getting in there on a day-to-day basis and having conversations about the importance of literature. This is what I do every day. When there are people who come in and don't understand the arts or how literature functions or what it needs to function and why it needs to function and why there needs to be an infrastructure and why you need all of this to make sure that you have writers and translators and people up at festivals like this so audiences like this can come. You do a lot of explaining and you do a lot of conversation, you do a lot of human contact, and you do a lot of smiling, and you do a lot of just really like, and a lot of listening. It's not like I have all the answers. That's not why I come to a festival like this, is to teach. I come to listen. It's primarily why I'm here. So I really do say, so what is on your mind? Tell me what your perspective is so I understand it so we can have a conversation. And that's, you take it day by day and make sure that you get the message out and that we're not just, we're providing access to the arts and we're not just helping create and, it's all about the messaging. Thank you for asking.
I found out about a month ago that in the United States, about 21% of our population is functionally illiterate, about 14% is actually illiterate, and I think 10% of all high school students are either functionally or actually illiterate. I was horrified because I don't know anybody like that. So what do you think we can do to solve that? Oh, wow.
We have the problem of illiteracy, which is not just in the United States but worldwide, obviously. It is a huge problem and there are many organizations working on this. It's a long answer to that question. It is a problem and it's not one that I mostly focus on, I have to say, because I work for an arts organization and so I mostly focus on contemporary literature, not necessarily the illiteracy problem of just getting people to read, but actually making sure that there's quality literature out and about. So I am not as familiar with that problem, but there are many agencies and many organizations working on that problem. But it's a conversation that is huge. It is a good question.
One more. Loud.
All right. So when I think about conscious reading, I think about how it inspires emotions in people and how that's really important. So how important feelings and emotions are to that, and how subversive making someone feel can be, and how dangerous that is. So what kind of spaces do you guys experience where you can read and talk about reading and talk about dangerous feelings and feel safe and feel heard? Who do you guys think?
You're asking from a writer's perspective.
She said dangerous feelings, Amy.
It's all because I said we were being taped.
Everybody's pushing.
Yeah. Going out for a beer later, are we? You know what? That's a good question too. From my perspective, from a writer's perspective, that you go full force on dangerous feelings, right? From a funder's point of view, what do you do? I have to be conscious of it. The best I can do is make sure that as many voices can be, that art is art and writers write what they write, and you have to make sure that as long as there's not just one type of writer out there, that you're getting the voices from as many people as possible, then those dangerous feelings are dangerous feelings that others can relate to, and that creates dialogue, and that creates more of a empathetic culture. So I think it's important to encourage the dangerous feelings, but I understand why you're asking, because we have to navigate through that in terms of funding, but that's also sort of, I'm a defender of the arts, and I attack it that way.
Writer too.
I'm a writer.
The mother of a very nice child
I have a nice child.
No, you don't?
I do.
We're out of time. Thank you
What's linked to
all.
your child?
Conversations should continue.